Welcome back, everyone, to Meditations by Gregory T. Obert, bringing you the best new guided meditations and mental health discussions every week. I'm your host, clinical psychologist Dr. Gregory T. Obert. Thank you so much for joining me today. And in fact, I have just the greatest gift that I could give for all of you because I have on someone who is super interesting, who's done incredible work in her career, and I'm just so excited to pick her brain about her story and mental health and recovery. So, Miss Cat Greenleaf created and hosted NBC's long-running series Talk Stoop, the celebrity interview show filmed on her Brooklyn front steps. Over 9 years, she hosted hundreds of guests, racked up 4 Emmys, launched countless adventures, and had so much fun. And then she got fired. And after losing her job, she thought she'd never go back to journalism. With no other marketable skills and no idea what to do next, she entered an epic, dark night of the soul. Looking for light, her family moved to the beach in Coney Island. There, Cat got serious about her own sobriety and began bringing recovery meetings to incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and men. That work inspired her to found the nonprofit Restorative Housing Organization, which we will talk more about. She loves it, but once a journalist, always a journalist. So when she weirdly got name-checked on Hacks last season, she took it as a sign. Soon after, she heard her old friend, musician Steve Earle, talking openly about his sobriety on a radio show, a thing she didn't know people were even allowed to do. And she realized she wanted to be the one talking to Steve Earle about sobriety on a show. Hence, Soberness, her podcast, was born in September 2024. And I will say we're going to get a little PG with the language here, but that's okay because I think it allows for a great discussion. So Soberness, the concept is freedom from fuckery. The fuckery of addiction, the self-inflicted fuckery, and the fuckery that shows up uninvited. Soberness, the podcast, is where celebrity raconteurs spill what broke them, what saved them, and what still fucks with them today. Miss Cat Greenleaf, thank you so much for being here with me and my audience.
I'm thrilled, and it was so cute hearing you say fuckery over and over.
You weren't expecting that, huh?
You said PG, and then you launched right into it. So.
That's right. Well, I had a drum instructor for a long time, and whenever he'd talk about discipline, he would say, all right, guys, we're going to get a little PG here, and then he'd launch into something that was clearly not PG. But
I love that. I love it.
So, usually, I like to start with a quick little icebreaker, which is tell me your life story in 30 seconds or less. But I think for you, it needs to be at least 35 seconds because you have done so much in your life. And I would love to hear, in your own words, just a little bit about who you are and how you got to where you're at today.
Oh, boy. Okay, so
you don't have to use 35 seconds, by the way. That's just a joke.
I mean, there's so many different fronts that we could start on. Let's see, because we came together through my sobriety podcast, I can start with. I'll start there, which is so I knew from the time I heard about alcohol, that I was going to love it, and that I was going to probably do it to the extreme. And that one day I would have to end up getting sober. And I knew all this as a very young person because I really started drinking when I was 12. And so I stopped drinking at 42. So that was, around 42. So about, 30 good years of drinking. Mm-hmm. I white knuckled it, meaning I recovered alone for the first 10 years about. And then in the last couple of years, really started reaching out and being in recovery groups, which allowed me to then start bringing recovery into prisons and start my show. So in fact, experiencing recovery with other people turned out to be a real plus in my mind. So that's one part of my story. Another part of my story is when I was 6 years old, my grandfather mentioned to me that my sister was adopted, and I didn't know before that. And at that moment, I knew I would be adopting kids. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't thought through. It wasn't anything. It was a knowing. And that is what happened. And I adopted, along with my husband, we adopted our 2 sons, Primo and Truman, at birth. In fact, we were in the room with both of them when they were born, which is unusual. And I'm so grateful. And they are now 13 and 16 and the lights of my life.
What an amazing calling, by the way. And just to be able to take care of other people like that. I mean, it's so selfless, and what a great gift you could give them.
Oh, thanks for saying that. It doesn't, yeah, I think that all parenthood is sort of inherently selfish in that we want to be parents.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what starts it, and you want this thing and you want this family. Anywho, I knew that those two we were destined for each other, and it's been that way ever since. But ironically, everyone said to me, "You'll never get married. Nobody wants to marry someone who doesn't want their own kids. Why would you adopt when you can have your own kids?" And I met not only a guy, but the guy. And as it turns out, this is weird. I had spent a great deal of my childhood staring into this man's backyard, but we never met because we grew up around some water in Westchester, New York. And so I was on one side and he was on the other side. And sort of very Great Gatsby. And I used to stare into his backyard, and I wondered what went on in those big houses. Like they had docks and they were made of stone. I don't know. They just seemed very glamorous. And as it turns out, so I sort of married the boy next door. And well, adoption wasn't what he had in mind. He loved me and he loved my commitment to it. And so we decided that we would adopt one. And if he still felt like he had a big hole in his soul, that we would try to have one ourselves. And I knew that it was never going to come to that, and it never has. So
Wow.
that's been very cool. And then another pillar in my house of stories is, how I came into broadcast, which is I also knew from a young age that I needed to be busy every day. I've never been good with unstructured time. And in so I went into news, not that I felt really smart enough to do the news or even that interested in like news, but I knew I wanted to be busy every day. And I looked around the world of entertainment, and hosts can wait their whole lives to get a phone call. And, anyway, so I started as a traffic reporter at KGO News Talk FM in San Francisco. And
Is
I
that
had this
jingle just burned into your mind? You just
Yes, forever. And I had this little dachshund called Julio, a mini dachshund, and he and I used to ride in a Cessna plane every night and do the traffic. And I have a terrible sense of direction. I have no sense of direction, actually. And so that was really challenging. But I did that, and that started it all off. And then from there, I little by little worked my way into becoming a features reporter. And from there, that gave birth to my show Talk Stoop, which lasted a good decade on NBC, and I really love that. And I've been a broadcaster my whole life, so I truly, without that job, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do or who to be or how to be, and but God is good, and it led to some really good self-reflection time. Like I said, I knew from when I was little, I like to be busy. And I think part of why we like to be busy is so that we don't have to be with ourselves. And, I was the busiest. I would only sleep like every other night. And I loved doing things and not thinking or feeling things. And so after losing my job, moving out here to Coney Island, which is right on the beach in Brooklyn, I got to do a lot of sitting on the rocks and singing to the ocean, and it was not an easy process, meaning I had all this time to just sit with myself. But I'm very grateful for having had the sort of strength and bravery to do that, to sit and really look at myself. And I was working, with a spiritual teacher, and I worked on and off with therapists, and it ended up being a really fruitful few years. So by the time, as you mentioned in your intro, I did hook back in with Steve Earle and Hank Azaria and other people who had been on my show previously who were out there talking about sobriety. I thought, okay, maybe I can go back to broadcast and talk about something I understand. And so we just kicked off our second season of Soberness, and the unexpected benefit for me has been the wisdom of my guests. As a broadcaster, you just feel like the conduit of the information. At least for me, I don't always feel like the information is meant for me. It's meant for my listeners, right? But because it's also meant for me, I've been able to have conversations around sobriety that have been beneficial in so many ways. Each guest has left me with a different gift. So Anyway, that's my story, but I know it's longer than 35.
No, that's fine. But this is why I was so excited to have you on, because what a journey that you have. And you sort of kind of went strength and courage, but man, you have really demonstrated so much strength and courage and the self-reflection that is needed to really kind of improve our lives, get to a different, healthier place. It's hard to do that. It's really hard to do that.
Yeah,
In
I didn't
fact,
like it, by the way.
yeah,
It's not like it was
who
fun.
does?
Yeah. Some
It,
people might. I don't know. Not me.
well, sometimes it's nice, but then other times it can be really tough and really challenging. And in fact, before we met, I was not only have I been listening to your show, but I also took a look at Talk Stoop. Maybe about an hour before we recorded this, and I was watching the
Yeah.
interview you had with Martha Stewart, where she was totally going off the rails and just not focused. But you were so good at it. You're so good at it. It was so engaging, even though it was 5, 6 minutes, however long the actual clip was. And you did this show for a number of years. You got awards for this show, and to be told, "Hey, you don't have a job anymore," just must have been so devastating.
Oh, yeah, it was the worst. It was absolutely the ugh. Listen, when you feel you are a person or a way and this thing defines you, and then you no longer have that definition, and having it ended so ugly, so abruptly, with no real reason given, for me, that was really devastating. And thank God, once again, God is good. So we had lived in downtown Brooklyn, where the stoop itself is. That was really my house. And if I had had to stay in that house after losing my job, I just don't know how I would have done it. I probably would have gone back to drinking full time. But I had already had this deal in place to come to Coney Island. And we had planned to buy this Coney Island house and rent it out. But then I saw, well, why don't we flip flop that? We'll rent out the old house and move to a new house so that I can be away from all that. Because the whole neighborhood was in on the show. I mean, it was just like everywhere you turn.
Yeah.
And it had been so long. So, uh, yeah. So here's how I did it. And I don't suggest it. I knew I was not prepared to feel any of that, how bad it was. So I just put on steel trap blinders and went forward and looked to do new things. And I moved my family, and I was like, I just can't think about it. I can't go there. I'm not going to think about it. And I tried to do all this other healing, and I did a lot of other healing in other sort of quadrants of my life. And then at the start of 2024, I could just feel it. You feel it. You feel when the winds are changing or things are coming. And
Mm-hmm.
the feeling I had at the top of last year was, well, we've now faced and pushed through a lot of things in other areas of my life. Work is next. And I just knew it, and I didn't have to do anything, right? I just was waiting for it to come. And then around March is when I really started to get dissatisfied with not being in broadcast. But I was afraid because I had been off the air for so long. And like I said, I don't, I'm under a pretty heavy NDA, so I can't do a lot of talking about this, but
Sure.
but I never really got a lot of information about why it ended. And so uncertainty, I find, or rather, not knowing, not having real answers, whether you like them or not, can almost be worse than having an answer you don't like. And so I was terrified, and I didn't know how I'd be received, and would it look like a has-been just trying to, make her mark again. And so it was terrifying, and I had to wade in little by little. And then, yeah. So point being, it was a really tough time. I wasn't sure how it was going to go down, but I knew that if I was going to be this brave person that I wanted to be, that was busy moving through the blocks in my life, that this was the next one. And, again, if you refer to like when I was really tiny, I knew I wanted to be involved in work, uber alles, and I did. And so I was going to have to get back to it sooner or later.